I was standing in a parking lot at 11 p.m. with a car seat in one hand and a duffel bag in the other, and my mother-in-law was telling me very calmly that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. She wasn't wrong that it was the biggest decision of my life. She was wrong about everything else. My name is Wren Castellan, and 14 months ago I left a marriage, a house, and a family who told me I would crawl back within the year, broke and humiliated, asking for forgiveness. I want to tell you what I built instead. Because the year they were so sure would break me turned out to be the year that made me. Welcome back to Real Family Voices, where the women who were counted out get to tell you exactly what happened next. If you've ever been told you wouldn't survive without someone, stay with me. This one's for you. I need to back up because none of what happened in that parking lot makes sense without understanding what I'd already survived to get there. I married Desmond when I was 26. He came from a family with money, the kind of money that gets discussed in careful, polite tones at dinner parties, never directly, always implied. His mother, Vivian, ran that family the way some women run companies, with absolute authority and the unshakable belief that her judgment was simply correct. I didn't come from that. I grew up in a 2-bedroom rental with a single mother who worked 2 jobs and somehow still made it to every parent-teacher conference. I knew what it meant to build something out of very little, and I think that's exactly why Vivian never fully trusted me. In her eyes, I would always be the girl who married up. For 9 years, I tried to earn a place in that family that I never actually needed to earn anywhere else in my life. I learned which fork to use. I learned to laugh at the right moments and stay quiet at the others. I had 2 children, Margot and Theo, and I poured myself into being exactly the kind of wife and mother that family expected. Desmond worked in his father's investment firm. Steady hours, generous salary, the kind of career path that had been laid out for him since birth like a red carpet he never had to question. I worked 2 freelance graphic design, the kind of job that's flexible enough to build a life around small children, but never quite respected enough to be discussed at those dinner parties as a real career. I told myself the imbalance didn't matter, that love evens things out eventually, that a family is a family, regardless of who's contributing what. I believed that for 9 years. Right up until I found out exactly how much I was worth to that family the moment I stopped being useful to them in the way they expected. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. It happened the way most marriages actually end, which is to say quietly over a long stretch of small erosions that you convince yourself you're imagining. Desmond had started staying late at the office. Not dramatically late. Just late enough to miss dinner 3 nights a week, then 4. He'd started taking calls in the garage with the door shut. He'd started looking at his phone the way men look at their phones when there's a person on the other end of it who matters more than the conversation happening in front of them. I asked him directly one evening in March. Not accusing. Just asking. He told me I was being paranoid, that work was simply demanding right now, that I needed to trust him. I wanted to trust him. I genuinely did. What I found 3 weeks later wasn't a text message left open on a counter. It was something quieter and somehow worse. A second phone hidden in a gym bag he never used for the gym. 18 months of messages to a woman named Priya, who worked 2 floors above him at the firm. 18 months. While I was raising his children and making excuses for his absences and defending him to my own mother when she gently asked if everything was okay. I confronted him that night. He didn't deny it. He didn't even seem particularly sorry. He told me with the same calm tone he used to discuss quarterly earnings that he'd been unhappy for a long time, that things had simply happened, that he hoped we could handle this like adults. I filed for divorce 2 weeks later. What I did not expect, what I genuinely did not see coming despite 9 years inside that family, was what happened when I told Vivian. I called her myself. I thought she deserved to hear it from me before the rumors started. I told her what Desmond had done, the second phone, the 18 months, the woman from his office. I told her I was filing. There was a long silence on the line. The kind that tells you everything before a single word follows it. "Wren," she said finally, "I think you need to consider what you're about to throw away." What I was about to throw away. As if I was the one holding the match. "He cheated on me for a year and a half," I said. "Men make mistakes," she said. "Desmond has provided an excellent life for you and those children. You'd be wise to remember that before you do something rash." I sat with that sentence for a long time after I hung up the phone. Desmond has provided. As if the house and the schooling and the carefully curated life were gifts rather than the bare minimum of a marriage. As if my 9 years of running that household, raising those children, and showing up to every single family obligation were worth nothing the moment I stopped accepting his behavior. 2 days later, Desmond moved out, and within the week I learned that the house I had spent 9 years making into a home, was solely in his name. A detail I'd never thought to question because I'd never imagined I'd need to. I had 90 days, his lawyer informed me politely, to find other arrangements. I want to pause here because I know some of you are already wondering why I never put my name on that house. And I've asked myself that same question more times than I can count. The honest answer is that you don't expect to need protection from people you've built a life with. You don't draw up contingencies for betrayal while you're busy raising children and showing up to dinner parties. But here's what I learned in the months that followed. The absence of a contingency plan doesn't mean the absence of a future. Keep watching, because what happened next is the part Vivian never saw coming. I called my own mother first, the way you call the person who has never once made you feel small. She offered immediately, no hesitation, but her apartment was a one-bedroom in another state, and I had 2 children in 90 days and a job that depended on staying near their school and the small client base I'd spent years building. So I did the thing I never imagined I'd have to do. I called Vivian again, and I asked if the children and I could stay in the guest house on the property just temporarily, just until I found something stable. The Castellan property had a guest house. A full guest house, 3 bedrooms, sitting empty behind the main estate, used twice a year for visiting relatives and otherwise gathering dust. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. "I don't think that's appropriate, Wren," she said. "Given everything that's happening with you and Desmond, I think it's best if you find your own arrangements. This is a family matter, and I think it's important for the children to have stability somewhere that isn't quite so close to the conflict." A family matter. As if I had stopped being family the moment her son's affair became inconvenient for her to address. I drove out there anyway, 3 days before my 90 days were up, with Margot and Theo in the back seat and a single duffel bag in the trunk because I genuinely did not know what else to do. I stood in that circular driveway I had pulled into 100 times over 9 years, and I rang the doorbell of a house I had once been told to think of as my second home. Vivian answered herself. She looked at me, then at the children, then back at me, and her expression did something careful and rehearsed, like she'd practiced this exact moment in front of a mirror. "Wren," she said, "I told you on the phone. This isn't a good time. Vivian, I have nowhere to go. I have 2 children in the car. You knew this was coming. You should have planned better." I felt something crack quietly in my chest. Not break. Crack. The kind of fracture you don't fully feel until much later. "Please," I said. "Just the guest house. Just for a few weeks." She looked past me at the car, at Margot's small face pressed to the window, and for 1 second I thought I saw something soften. Then Desmond's father, Holt, appeared behind her in the doorway, and whatever was about to soften, hardened right back into place. "This isn't our problem to solve," he said. "Desmond will handle his own household. We're not going to interfere." Interfere. As if helping his own grandchildren find a place to sleep was an act of interference rather than the bare minimum of decency. I stood on that porch with my 2 children and I did not cry, because Margot was watching me with the same careful eyes she gets from me, and I was not going to fall apart in front of her. "Okay," I said. Just that. I turned around. I walked back to the car. I buckled my children into their seats with hands that were shaking in a way I hoped they couldn't see, and I drove away from a house I would never set foot in again. That night, the 3 of us slept in a budget motel 40 minutes outside the city. Margot thought the vending machine in the lobby was the most exciting thing she'd ever seen. Theo, only 3, just wanted to be held. I held him until he fell asleep, and then I lay awake in the dark and made myself a single promise. Watch what happens. I'm going to skip past the hardest weeks, not because they weren't real, but because this story was never really about the hardship. It's about what I built once I stopped waiting for someone to let me back in. Stay with me because the next part is the part Vivian and Holt are still hearing about secondhand, from people who can't quite believe it. I'm going to tell you what I had, not what I'd lost. I had a freelance design career I'd spent 6 years quietly building, even when nobody in that family considered it a real job. I had a handful of long-term clients who valued my work and didn't care whose name was on a deed. I had a mother who would have driven across 3 states without being asked twice. And I had 2 children who needed me to be steady more than they needed me to be perfect. One of my longtime clients, a woman named Idris who ran a small architecture firm, called me 2 weeks after I'd moved into a temporary apartment. She'd heard, the way small professional circles hear things, that my situation had changed. She didn't offer pity. She offered me a full-time position leading the firm's design department with benefits, with stability, with a salary that made me sit down on my kitchen floor when she said the number out loud. I said yes before she'd finished the sentence. I found a 2-bedroom apartment in a building with a courtyard where Margot and Theo could play while I watched from the window. The kitchen counters were chipped. The radiator made a sound like a small dying engine every winter morning. It was nothing like the house I'd left. It was entirely mine. The divorce took 11 months. Desmond's family hired the kind of attorney whose hourly rate could feed a small country, and they used every resource they had. But here's the thing about a father who has spent 9 years assuming someone else would handle the actual parenting. When it came time to document who had actually shown up, who had managed the school schedules and the pediatrician visits and the 2 a.m. fevers, there was simply nothing on his side of the ledger. I was granted primary custody. Desmond received alternating weekends. I also learned something in the financial discovery process that I hadn't fully understood before. Despite Vivian's insistence that Desmond had provided for our family, a significant portion of our actual household stability over the years had come from my freelance income, quietly funding things the family had simply assumed Desmond was covering. I had been subsidizing a lifestyle while being told I contributed nothing to it. I requested, and was granted, a fair division of marital assets that reflected 9 years of unrecognized labor. Vivian found out about the settlement the way these things travel in tight social circles secondhand, through someone who couldn't resist mentioning it at a luncheon. She called me for the first time in 11 months. I heard the settlement was generous, she said, in a tone that suggested she found this somehow unfair. It was accurate, I said. Wren, I hope you understand we never meant for things to go this way. I thought about the porch. I thought about the duffel bag and Margot's face pressed to the car window and the word interfere. I understood exactly how things were meant to go, Vivian. I understood it very clearly standing on your porch. She didn't have an answer for that. 8 months after the settlement, Idris promoted me to partner. Not as an exception, not as a kindness. Because the work spoke for itself, because the clients I'd been quietly bringing in for years had become a meaningful piece of the firm's growth. I bought a house. Small, 3 bedrooms, a kitchen with counters that weren't chipped, a backyard big enough for Theo to finally have the dog he'd been asking for since he was old enough to ask for anything. On the anniversary of the night in the parking lot, I stood in that kitchen making dinner, and I realized something that stopped me mid-stir. I hadn't thought about Vivian or Holt or that porch in weeks. Not because I forced myself not to, because my life had simply gotten full enough that there wasn't room for them in it anymore. That's not a small thing. That took 14 months to build. Margot, who is 8 now, came into the kitchen that evening while I was cooking and leaned against the counter the way she does when she has something on her mind. Mom, she said, do you think Grandma Vivian misses us? I thought about how to answer that honestly without putting any weight on her small shoulders that didn't belong there. I think some people only miss what's useful to them, I said carefully. And I think you and your brother are the least useful, most important people in my entire life. There's a difference. She thought about that for a moment, the way she thinks about everything slowly and seriously. I like that, she said, and went back to her homework. I don't speak to Desmond's family anymore, not out of anger, but because I stopped waiting for an apology somewhere around month 9, when I realized that waiting for one was its own kind of staying. And I am no longer interested in staying anywhere I had to beg to be let into. I do still speak to Desmond briefly, efficiently, only about the children. He has, to his credit, shown up for his custody weekends consistently. That's the bar now. It's a low one. It's still more than his mother managed. There's a particular kind of justice that doesn't announce itself with a confrontation. It builds quietly in increments. It's a partnership earned on merit. It's a mortgage with only your name on it. It's 2 children who fall asleep in their own rooms, in a home you built without anyone's permission, and you wake up to them asking for pancakes and you realize you have stopped counting the cost of getting here. That's not a small victory. That's the whole victory. If someone has ever told you there's no room for you, no space, no time, no place in their life that has your name on it, I want you to hear something. That sentence is not a verdict. It's information. It tells you exactly who was never planning on holding the door open in the first place. The people who closed that door on me are still living the exact same lives they were living 14 months ago. Same house, same circles, same careful silences at dinner parties. I am living an entirely different life. One I built from a duffel bag in a parking lot in 3 words I whispered to no one but myself. If you've ever stood at a door like that, tell me in the comments what you built afterward. I read every single one, and I promise you this community understands exactly what it cost you to get here. Subscribe for the next story, because next week, we're talking about the mother-in-law who tried to take her son's children the moment the divorce was final, and the one piece of evidence that made the entire courtroom go silent. I'll see you then.